Well, hello all you wonderful people out there in YouTube land, and welcome to the Texas Special YouTube channel for this March 2025 quarterly HO scale locomotive review. And this quarterly review we are going to be taking a look at a Life-Like Proto 1000 Cotton Belt GP20. This locomotive is currently at the time of this filming, a DC locomotive, but down the line I intend to put a Digitrax sound decoder in this guy. Detail wise, this is probably one of the nicest locomotives in the entire fleet, and I absolutely love running it. It is a great engine and it is a very stout puller, as you guys will see later in this product review. So to start off with, you can see a little blemish here. That was a sunshade that was originally glued on. I got this guy secondhand from a fellow member of the Texas Model Railroad Club. You can see the cotton belt is in the correct spot. The 802 numbering is prototypically accurate and prototypically located on the cab. You have a cast-on grill detail here, here, and here. You also have cast-on grill vents, whatever you want to call them, here and here. You can see this little detail back here is separately applied. That's actually the locomotive handbrake. Looking at the nose of the engine and behind the cab, you can see separately applied and accurately painted yellow grab irons, as well as along the front and rear of the locomotive. And you can see the steps, the edges of the steps have the prototypically appropriate FRA mandated contrasting paint. The main reservoir is cast on to the body of the locomotive, and this fuel tank is all one piece and attached to the frame. It actually slips over the weight of the frame. These trucks are very nicely detailed. The only thing they are missing is the wire that runs from the speedometer sensor to obviously the speedometer. And I will try and zoom in on probably the rear truck because it's slightly better illuminated. Well, that's a lot better than what you were seeing, and looks like that's going to be the best it's going to be. But everything, all of the major components are there. You have the brake shoes cast on. Everything is cast on one piece. And you can see each truck has the prototypically correct 2 brake cylinders per side per truck. Right now we're looking at the locomotive engineer's side of the engine. Oh, rude of me, I forgot. The doors, I'm not going to attempt it right now, but the doors on the rear of the cab for the engineer side on the rear of the cab and the conductor side on the front of the cab, they do actually open up. And before I forget, you do have a separately applied sand filling nozzle here. Here we are looking at the conductor side of the engine. Yes, I know that when these locomotives were first introduced, it would have been either the fireman or brakeman side of the locomotive, however, depending on the terminology. But this is intended to model more towards the modern era, and so I work for a railroad in this day and age, so I will be using the more modern terminology simply because that's what feels more natural to me. I got blasted for this in an earlier product review. I really don't care. I mean, it's not going to make that big of a difference whether the model runs good or not if I use the... You guys get what I'm saying. Anyway, back at it. You have the emergency fuel shut-off button here, and it's also on the other side, just that little red dab of paint there. The conductor side of the locomotive is identical to the engineer side with regard to one key detail, the turbocharger housing right here, two key details, and the bell, a separately applied bell right here off the back of the cab, which for Cotton Belt is prototypically accurate so far as I can tell. Alright, so here it is, the business end of this locomotive. You can see the appropriately numbered 802 number boards on either side of the cab. You can see the front two of the two forward facing of the 3-chime horn. Better view of those separately applied grab irons I was talking about, as well as right here. And you can see the MU hoses, not the MU cable, the MU hoses are in place, and you have a footboard, a brakeman's footboard on the front of the locomotive. The hand railings all the way throughout this locomotive are a nice, very flexible acetal plastic. If I mispronounced that, I'm sorry. With a brake chain detailing here. And here's the really cool part that I like about this engine. It's actually one of my favorite features. This little plate here that on the prototype, when it's MU'd to another locomotive, you would drop that down so you can walk a little bit more safely between two units, from one unit to another. That's actually separately applied, and it drops down and raises back up as needed. So I really like that. That's really cool. Another note, this was, I know for sure, was a Cotton Belt thing. You have the SSW 802 right here on the front of the pilot, which again, really cool. This engine is very nicely detailed. It's very nicely done. The classification lights or marker lights, whatever you want to call them, on the nose of the locomotive, unfortunately they are cast on details, so they don't operate. And the headlights and number boards did illuminate when I got this engine for about 3 seconds before the in-scale decoder inside of it fried, and I had to rip all that out. So, which is why the engine is, again, at the time of this filming, a DC locomotive. Hopefully, by the time this is published, this will have sound, and I will double back and do a product review, not necessarily on the locomotive, but on the decoder that's installed in the locomotive. On the rear of the engine, we find very nicely done separately applied grab irons all the way up the end of the long hood, plus on the top here the matching and prototypically accurate 802 number boards, cast on classification or marker light detailing. That little flip down little bridge piece there, I always forget what the heck it's called. Separately applied grab iron here, MU hoses. Again, this headlight and these number boards did illuminate when I first got this engine, but the decoder fried and stuff happened, and I just wanted to get the damn thing running again, so sacrifices were made. And a little bit better shot of that separately applied handbrake detail right there. So looking at the top side of this locomotive, there's a few things that I'm going to point out to you that you may or may not be able to see clearly on the camera, other than the fact that it's a little dirty, or dusty rather. There is actually safety tread, non-slip safety tread, that is simulated, cast onto the walkways all around the locomotive and along the steps on the pilot of the locomotive. You have a real nice shot of this 3-chime Nathan air horn, which is a carryover from SP's purchasing practices. You know, by the time that this locomotive would have been acquired by the Cotton Belt, the Cotton Belt was firmly in Southern Pacific's holdings, although on paper a completely separate and independent entity. The grills over all of the fans are actually see-through grills, which I absolutely love. It's a very nice detail, and there's actually little fan blades in there that you can see. Obviously they don't operate. That'd be really cool if they did, but they don't. And you have I can't tell if it's separately applied or cast onto the body. It's probably separately applied. Exhaust stack, again, of course, non-operational, doesn't work, but you know, it is there. And you have the sand filling nozzle right here on the very end of the locomotive. Now, Life-Like did a very good job on the paint job, except for one area. And it's not a big thing. In fact, most of the time I don't even notice it. Real talk, I didn't even notice it, truthfully, till I started looking the engine over, getting ready to do the product review. That's when it finally stood out to me. But if we look at the rear on the long hood, there is just a little bit of bleed over. The separation between the red and the gray is not as clean and crisp as it could be. Everywhere else on this model, well, I say everywhere else, on the nose of this model, the separation is crisp and flawless. On the rear, on the long hood, it could have been a little better. It's not the worst I've ever seen. It's certainly a little bit better done than my older blue box Athearn engines, but it still leaves stuff to be desired as far as cleanliness and crispness. Other than that, all of the paint is applied evenly. There's no translucence to any of the paint on anywhere on the locomotive, other than where the red bled through a little bit into the gray. But other than that, everything is nice and opaque. You can clearly tell that this is a Cotton Belt locomotive, and overall this is a fantastic locomotive. And here in a second, I've got a train, a large 20-car train, and I get 20 cars may not be that, you know, it may not necessarily be a gigantic train, but remember, we're talking about 20 cars. Some of them are 60-footers on a 4x18 foot HO scale model railroad with 18-inch radius curves all the way throughout, and it's unlevel. So we're gonna fire this guy up and couple up to this train and get it rolling. I want to add that right now there is absolutely zero wheel slip out of this train, out of this locomotive, pulling this, for this railroad with these curves and this unlevel footing, large train by itself.